up, coders? Derek Codes here. Today we're going to be going over Laravel token authentication using Sanctum. Now, Sanctum is one of the most widely used tools to do token authentication in your API in the Laravel community. And big shout out to one of my subscribers who has said, "Hey, Derek, can you do a video on token authentication and specifically using Sanctum?" I said, "Heck yeah, I can. Let's do it. It's going to be awesome." So stay tuned. Thanks for watching. All right, coders, so the first thing we want to do is jump over to Laravel's documentation. Like I always say, we always want that documentation up. It's going to help you in your process, building out what you're going to do. You always want it up there just to reference things. That way you're not having to search for things later on when things start falling apart on you. So Laravel Sanctum, as far as I have seen, has been built into Laravel for a while. The package always seems to be installed. It does, as you kind of dive in here, it does say to actually install it if it's not already installed. So it's already installed for me, so it's not something that we have to worry about as far as I've seen. And as always, what's really important about reaching out and watching these videos is Laravel's a big system, right? We all know that. It can do a lot of things, and you can do it a lot of different ways. And from what I've seen, their documentation, it's straightforward. You know, you can run through everything right down the line, but it goes through things that as a beginner you're not going to need to worry about and you're not going to need to bother with. But that's just my opinion. I think that's why these videos are important, is to have someone show you, hey, this is how I would do it really, really quickly. So that being said, got that disclaimer out of the way, let's jump over to our code. This is our routes file from a recent video that we did where we built out a contact controller and a warranty controller just to store some data and list some data back to the user. And I thought that would be a good idea to use this listing index here to list these contacts back out to the user. Hide that behind Laravel Sanctum, token authentication. So we'll have to require the user to authenticate before they can list the data back. I thought that'd be kind of cool, right? So now that we know that Laravel Sanctum is installed, which is pretty easy to do, in this routes file, you'll see they actually gave us an example code snippet here, so we kind of already know that it already is. But you can actually go to your composer file, composer.json, and look for this line right here, Laravel Sanctum. And so that's how we actually know it's installed, right? All right, so we know that it's installed. We know we have to update our routes to actually hide this index file. So let's go ahead and do that right now. And to show you what it looks like before we get started, jumping over to Insomnia, my REST client, I'm going to hit this API endpoint. You can see there's a lot of entries right in here, right? These are all people that have filled out our contact forms. We're just listing all this data back. So if we actually want to hide that data with Sanctum, what we're going to do is, since it's just one endpoint, you can actually add the middleware attribute on here and say you have to authenticate with Sanctum to be able to use this endpoint. Go ahead and refresh that. See, it says authorized, denied. Perfect, it's exactly what we want. But if you have a lot of different endpoints you wanna hide, you should probably use a route group, and I'll show you how that works as well. So you actually have to define, that's not a route group, it's a route middleware group. All right, so the middleware we want this group to have is Sanctum, and then we're going to group it with a function like that. And we're going to take this index and throw it in here. So that way, any of the routes in this group, so you can put tons and tons of routes here. You could throw the store in here too. You could have a whole bunch of routes in here. So let's go to Insomnia then and check out what that looks like. Perfect. It says that we're still unauthorized. So this whole group, that way you can group lots of different endpoints as well, not just one at a time, adding that middleware attribute onto the end of it. You can just say, hey, this whole group, all of these are requiring authentication. So pretty straightforward. Now from here, we know we're going to need a route to log in, right? So let's go ahead and set that up right now. It's going to be a post because you're going to be posting your username and password. So let's call it login. And what should we call our controller? Probably user controller, makes sense. in our method we're going to reference, we'll just call it the login method, right? That'll make it easy. And you notice that we're referencing this user controller the same way as we do these other controllers, but we have to add this namespace at the top again for it to actually reference the user controller, because otherwise we have to put this whole path right here in front of this controller, and that's kind of belong syntax. So we're going to make it nice and easy. Problem is this route though doesn't exist yet. We have to well, the route exists, the controller doesn't exist. So let's go ahead and get started and create that. So we're going to jump over to terminal and use PHP Artisan to actually create the controller. Now before I do that, let me jump over to my HTTP controllers. You'll notice from this previous project, I broke up our controllers from web controllers, which I would normally put in here, and then our API controllers. I make them separate just to organize my code a little bit. So I'm going to do the same thing with this. I'm going to say PHP Artisan, actually give me a little space here, PHP Artisan make controller, user controller. Oop. I'm going to actually put it in the API folder. I already forgot. API folder, and the model it's going to reference is the user model. Let me wait for that to finish. Awesome. All right, let's jump over to refresh this, go into our API. There's our controller. Let's open it up. And as you can see, just a blank controller here, nothing going on, right? So what we're going to want to do is actually create our login method that we defined in our routes. So when we hit the login endpoint, it's going to be hitting the login method. So let's build that out right now. And we're going to be passing in a request, so make sure you get that in there too. Cool. And just save that for now. I want to jump over to Insomnia because I like to build things in pieces. Now that I know that I feel like I have this working, right? There might be a syntax error, there might be an issue somewhere. So before we get any further and start debugging, rolling back what you did, I love to jump over to my REST client here. I'm going to create, I'm going to duplicate this one. I'm going to call it login. So it's going to be a post API login. Cool. Go ahead and refresh. Awesome. We got a 200. Okay. There's nothing returning because we're not returning anything in our login method in our controller that we built out, right? So, but this is successful. It means we did everything right thus far. So pretty straightforward. So let's go ahead and add some validation in here first to make sure that someone's actually submitting, let's say, you know, we're going to use probably an email address and a password to log in. So let's define some rules. Say email. Oh man, here. Let's make this an array of options here. Required. And it's going to be an email. And then password. It's also required, and that's a string. All right, so now we're going to use our built-in Laravel validation. We're going to pass the request object and our rules. Oops. There we go. All right, let's just jump back over to our Insomnia and see what that looks like. Perfect. We're actually getting an error here that says the email address and the password is required. That's exactly what we want. All right, so if it is valid though, it's going to continue on. And this is where we're going to want to try and actually authenticate the user. So let's set up our if else here. And then add our use illuminate support facades auth. We're going to add the auth facade namespace here because we're going to be using it down here. We're going to try and authenticate this user using authenticate attempt, and we actually pass it an array of options. The email address, request email, and then the password, request password. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Cool. All right, so then in here, we're going to authenticate our user and return a success message. But before we do that, as always, I'm just going to start returning my response. So I'm going to say my response is JSON status equals 1. And down here, if there's an error, I'm going to return status 0 and say my message unauthorized. Sweet. Go back to insomnia here. I'm going to actually add my form body here. My email address is derek@derekcodes.io, and my password is something we have to make up because we don't actually have we don't have a user yet in our system. So let's just figure out what a good password would be. How about derekcodes99? All right, cool, sweet. So it says status 0 unauthorized. So it's actually getting past validation. We have valid data submitted. The authentication is attempting and it's failing. So it's actually getting back here saying, hey, this user is not in our system, which is exactly what we want. It's perfect. So what we want to do from here is actually set up a user, I think, in our system. And then we'll actually create the token to then provide to our API. So let's do that. I actually have a handy dandy way to do that. And let me grab that code for you. All right, so I grabbed my code to actually create a new user, and I will throw this in the comments below so you don't have to go searching for it. It'll also be on my website as well, so you can jump over there and check it out. So let's jump over to terminal. We're gonna use PHP Artisan again, but this time we're gonna use Tinker. So we're gonna jump over to Tinker, and we're gonna paste some code here to actually create a new user. It's really, really handy when you don't have a way to register on your website yet, if you're just starting to build something out. This is the code snippet you'll need to create a new user with a password. Hit enter, and it's returning success with the user model that they put in the database there. Awesome, cool. And now let's go to our database just to see what that looks like. Right now, our users is empty. Go ahead and refresh this. And now you'll see that user that we created with the awesome secure encrypted password. All right, so from here, to summarize what we have done, we verified Laravel Sanctum is installed in our project. We've set up our middleware authorization around the routes that we want to protect. We've created our route to log in. We've created our controller. We've created our login method to do some basic checking. We've created our user that we're going to be using to authenticate. Now we actually have to create this token and return it to the user so they can use that token later on to access those secured routes. So let's jump back over to our code and do just that. So we've attempted to authenticate this user. It succeeded, right? That's why we're in here right now. So it succeeded in this if statement. And from here, let's just get the user object. And what we're going to do is build a little, in our response, let's do it right here. Say our token is user create token. And create token requires you to name the token. I'm not sure why. I'm going to call mine Derek Codes. And what we want to return to the user is a plain text token. And that's all we need to do. It's pretty straightforward. So let's jump back over to our REST client. Whoa, got a server error. That's not good. Let's go ahead and go back to our code editor and turn on debugging in our environment file here and try that again to see what happened. What did we do wrong here? All right, so we have a syntax error, so super easy to fix in our user controller at line 26. Go ahead and check that out. User controller, line 26. We're creating a token. Oh, we got a semicolon in there. Obviously, we didn't need that. My fault. All right, let's go back over and check. Cool. There we go. Now, we returned with our status 1. We returned our token. This is what we need here. And the user will save that to then authenticate later on with the other endpoints. But before we move on, let's go back over to our environment file and turn off debugging. We don't want that out there for people to see if there are actually issues in our code. All right, cool. So now back over to Insomnia. We've received this token and we will save this because we're going to jump over to this contact index endpoint, which previously we saw, since we wrapped it in the authentication middleware, now we're getting more unauthorized to access this endpoint, right? So let's jump into the headers and actually add the authorization header and the bearer token, it's called. So authorization is the name of the header and the value is bearer space the token that you're trying to use to authenticate. So I'm going to go and refresh, and now we can actually access that data. And that's all there is to it. So as you can see, what I mentioned at the beginning of the video is true. It is really easy to set this up using Sanctum in Laravel to authenticate a user, provide you back a token that then you can use to log in and actually access your other endpoints that you want to put behind lock and key. So it's really pretty straightforward, but due to Laravel's complexity in its ability to do so many different things and do it so many different ways and to provide documentation for all that stuff, it can be really overwhelming. So hopefully this was helpful to kind of wade through some of the cruft and actually show you the easy way to build out token authentication using Sanctum. Thank you so much for watching this episode. I hope you liked it. Be sure to comment below with any questions you have, ideas for my next video, or anything else that's on your mind. Also, like and subscribe and click the bell icon to get alerted of my next episode. Until next time, keep coding, everyone.